We're not broadcasting to YouTube yet, but that will come. Now we see Christoph as well. Very good. So
hope you can also hear me.
Yes, I can hear you as well.
Fine.
Very good. Diogo, do you know if Anderson is going to join us as a panelist as well?
Yeah, I believe so. I'm just checking in Slack with him, but you can proceed and he will join very soon. Give me just one moment that I'll try to give him a call.
No problem. Just wanted to make sure.
Okay, he's going to connect. Robert, he had the wrong link we had for the as a participant and not as a panelist.
Alexander was missing.
You're muted, Robert.
Esther, for your information, you are online on YouTube and you are going to be animator as from now.
Okay.
Okay, thanks.
Christian. I think Anderson needs to rename himself because he's now logged in as Diogo. Or we have two Diogos, I'm not sure what happened.
So I will try to enter again. Maybe it could be a
problem. Please stay. We see you. We do everything. We just want to rename you. I'll do that for you. There you are. Very good.
Robert, did you press recording?
Not yet. I was about to say, but I was muted. That everyone that's on the webinar, we will be recording this, and the recording will start now, and we'll be starting shortly. There's still people coming in, so just hang on for a little bit. Thank you. Well, a very warm welcome to everyone. My name is Robert Stegway. I will be moderating today's session. We still have some people coming in, but I'll start by explaining some of the rules for this webinar. Most of you are probably aware of it, but I'll go through them for everyone's understanding nevertheless. So if I can have the next slide, Esther. Today, you're welcome to the cross-border ePrescription community of expertise with Diogo Martins, Alexander Berler, and Marcello Margara presenting. I'll introduce the speakers and the panelists later on. If I go to the next slide, then some special rules for virtual meetings. Everybody is on mute, except for the panelists. They should be on mute as well. If you have a question, please post your question in the Q&A facility. I'll explain the Q&A facility in just a bit. We can, if need be, provide you with access to the mic, especially if we want to have a good discussion and we want you to respond to your question or clarify your question. So, but when you speak, please keep concise because there's more people on the webinar. And of course, you may show your approval either through the applaud button or also in the Q&A. After the presentations, you're not limited to just the topic of today's community of expertise, but you can ask any UNICOM related question in the Q&A if you feel like it. So going to the Q&A, you need to move your mouse on the screen so that the options bar will appear, and there will be a Q&A button on the bottom somewhere. You never know where it is. On this screen, it's all the way on the left. In my screen, it's all the way on the right. But if you click it, then the next screen will come up. There's a Q&A. You can just type your question. If there's already a question there, you can support the question by clicking a thumbs up, and that will move the question with the most thumbs up higher on the list for the presenters to answer. You can comment on a question, even if it's not your own question, but also if it's your own question. That keeps the comments and the questions together. So if you want to thank someone, don't pose a new question saying thank you, but just type a comment saying thank you behind the question. So if you type a question in the lower part, then that will be a new question that you can send. So that's the way it works. You will see all questions, or you can filter just your questions. And we as panelists will see, presenters and panelists will have a bit different view, but this is what you can choose. So if we go to the next slide, security is our priority. So everyone has registered themselves and have been provided with a special link. The session is password protected, so no one can just come in, hopefully. As mentioned, this session is being recorded and is also being streamed on YouTube at the same time. And at the end, there will be a questionnaire probably that will pop up, but we will also send you an email later on with a short evaluation. So that's all I wanted to say for now about the session. And now it's time to introduce our speakers. We have 3 speakers and 4 panelists, so it's and 2 moderators. Esther and I are moderating, so it's quite a full house on the top of your screen or wherever you can see the people that are there. Diogo Martins is working with SPMS in Portugal. He's coordinating a number of EU projects and has been doing that, has been participating over the years in more than 10 projects. Currently, he's involved in eHealth and Health ID, and also in UNICOM, of course. And he's been able to make the bridge between ICT expertise and how important it is to engage healthcare professionals and citizens to ensure healthcare enhancements. So within UNICOM, he leads work package 5 on the IDMP adoption by the eHealth services. I have to silence my phone, otherwise you will get pings. Alexander is also with us. He's the Director of Consulting Services at Gnomon in Greece. And he's also very active has been very active in international projects like Trillium and Trillium Bridge, Trillium 2, but has also been involved in e-procurement and e-government. And he's designed the interoperability framework for the Greek ePrescription system. He's currently a member of several societies, institutes, and organizations like IEEE, ACM, and HIMSS, and is a member of several IHE Europe committees, and also teaches at the National School of Public Health. He is the chair of HL7 Hellas, and which is the Greek HL7 affiliate. Within UNICOM, he leads Work Package 6 on the software extensions for CEF and the eHDSI, and that can be implemented as well through other things like the OpenNCP. And that's more what Marcello will be talking about. Marcello Malgara is with ARIA in Italy and working for the Lombardy region. He's been working on European research projects in health IT since 1982. That's quite a long time. And some of you who were here earlier, he's not planning on retirement yet. So he will be active with us for another period of time. He's been cooperating with the Lombardy region since 2008 on the creation of cross-border eHealth services, starting with APSOS and currently the MyHealth EU, which is the CEF eHDSI implementation across Europe. And of course, he's active in UNICOM as well. Within UNICOM, he leads Work Package 7 on piloting the IDMP enhanced cross-border services. So those are our esteemed and very experienced speakers. And for our panelists, we have Marta Teranco. Sorry about that. We'll just call her Marta. She's an experienced hospital pharmacist, and she's working now as a consultant for the European Commission Director General for Health and Food Safety. And she's involved in the development and operation of, amongst others, MyHealth EU and the eHDSI services for patient summaries and electronic prescriptions, and also works with the European reference networks for rare diseases. So, and she's also part of the EMA-SPOR task force. Some of you may know that task force very well on the implementation of ISO IDMP. So she's very welcome as one of our panelists, as is Christoph Gessner. He works for the eHealth Competence Center Gematik in Germany. He's also working within the eHealth project and is chair of the architecture group within the eHealth member state expert group within Europe. So he's quite aware of what's going on in the eHDSI and everything that needs to be done there. So, and he's been also active in numerous European projects and the joint actions on behalf of the German representation as well. Then we have Jose Costa Teixeira. He's active within UNICOM as well, both in Work Package 1 and in the combination of Work Packages 5, 6, 7. And he's also working in IHE Pharmacy. He's chair of HL7 Belgium, even though he has Portuguese roots, but he's very active in Belgium as well. And within UNICOM, he's also part of Work Package 1, where he assists in the IDMP-related standards and terminologies. And finally, Anderson Carmo is supporting Work Packages 5, 6, 7. He's a project manager also at SPMS in Portugal, and has been working on eHealth Action, Healthy ID, and other international projects. He has a PhD in genetics and a lot of experience as a researcher, integrating fields like molecular biology, genetics, and biochemistry. So he's been very active, and he's really the project manager within Work Package 5, supporting the project lead, or the Work Package lead, Diogo. So this is our lineup for today. If there's any questions or comments, then please ask them in the Q&A. And with that, I'll hand over to our speakers. On the next slide, they will find their way through the presentations. I think the first one will be Marcello. If it's on the
Thank you very much for the very kind introduction. Please fill the question and answer with many questions, so we have not to speak too much, because we know what we want to say, but we don't know what you are expecting from us. So in a certain sense, we're not aware of the type of audience we have today. So maybe some of the information are redundant for you, but please raise your hand saying stop. We know already everything, or slow down, but because we know to understand more. So this is our menu for today. So starting with a sort of roadmap for ISO IDMP implementation in eHealth, speak about the current standard and terminologies used in cross-border ePrescription, mainly in eHDSI. Then we go deeper into what we have studied, still not fully consolidated, but working on IDMP compliant identified and attributes to be included in the cross-border ePrescription. And we will also tell you something about our joint activity with national competent authorities, meaning the drug agency, on the availability of this information, and make some presentation on which are the changes required in order to inject into the current eHealth cross-border ePrescription and patient summary IDMP attributes, and then final remarks. So if you go to the next slide. Okay, let's start with the roadmap. So this is something just to recap a little and some terminology. Sorry if I will say sometime country A and country B, but country A is the country of affiliation of a citizen, who is the location where all his own clinical documents reside. And it happens that he needs to be abroad in a country B, country of treatment, and needs either to have care in emergency ward or get medication in a pharmacy or other cases. So in this relationship of the eHDSI, the patient citizen goes and meet a health professional, and this health professional starts the process of retrieving from the country of affiliation the clinical document. And these documents are made available in the country of treatment as a structured encoded document in the language possibly of the country of treatment, in order to maximize the safety and the quality of the document and of the treatment provided. If you click the next slide, and then there should be some animation. This is thanks to friends in the eHealth solution provider, a very quick explanation of what happens. So a document that is created in country A, country of affiliation, is transformed. Continue clicking, and then I will talk quickly enough. Converted in a format within the national contact point for eHealth in a way that can be then transferred on the other side using a standard version, a standard pilot document that is CDA based with a controlled vocabulary called a master value set catalog, transcoded from the national code system to the one used for the cross-border and translated into English. Then click again. And on the other side, the CDA is received in English, and then it is translated, the coded part, into the country B, country of treatment language, and made available to the health professional, both a pharmacist or a physician or any other person allowed to address this input. So this is the mechanism, the general mechanism. I think you all know it. If you need additional information, you can ask in the chat or offline. And let's go to the next slide, coming closer to our reality now. So in this process, both in ePrescription, of course, and in patient summary, medicinal products are included in the prescription is the medicine to be dispensed. In the patient summary is part of the medication summary, part of the allergies, and part of the vaccination. So the current process is that we already have a mechanism according to which information, coded information about medication are included in the current patient summary prescription, but the reality is that in most member states, this information is not as structured and coded as requested. So now the idea is, click one more, is to take advantage of the IDMP attributes that will be included by the national competent authorities to be compliant to the SPOR procedure, to provide to EMA, the European Medicinal Agency, the data structured and coded according to IDMP and SPOR to be stored in the PMS. But at least for the time being, the NCA have already started the process of coding and mapping the medicinal product registered in every single country according to that standard. And the idea here behind here is really to take advantage of this coded data provided by the NCA to inject them as additional attributes into the ePrescription, for example, to allow a safer identification of the medicinal product to be dispensed at the point of care or considered as a medicinal in the patient summary. So click next. Thank you. So now the roadmap that we have agreed with the eHDSI, MyHealth EU, and the member state is really to start assessing the status in the member state, the readiness state and the compliance to the standard, current standard and future standard based on IDMP. Then working in strict cooperation with the health authorities and SDO and the national competent authority to identify this minimum data set based on IDMP attribute to enrich the current ePrescription in order to improve the quality of coded data. And in order to make it a reality, working with the communities of eHDSI, meaning the ePrescription cluster, the patient summary cluster, the semantic task force, and the technical one, to create a change proposal to make possible the adoption of this IDMP enriched new specification, work toward the implementation of a needed extension in the eHDSI component, and perform a testing and deployment of the IDMP enhanced wave 6, meaning in 2023. This is our aim, our goal. Okay, I see the question, thank you. Can you go to the next one? And in order to perform this, of course, there are two streams. I don't go in detail of describing the work package, but the concept is that there is the National Competent Regulatory Authority and the EMA stream that consider the implementation of the Substance Management System, the EU SRS, the activity of defining the sport rules and implementation, the activity of adopting IDMP in member state, the activity of creating the medicinal product dictionary on the regulatory and medicinal product side, and on the health authority side, specify, implement, and pilot are, in few words, the goal of this tasks. So next. Yeah, I think now is the time to give the control to Alexander, and I will check the question if it is the need to buy VA. Yes, the concept is in the current eHDSI specification, things must be pivoted in English unless there are some exception, meaning this is the core specs. there is the possibility of conveying information as the narrative part, but the basic problem is that we can't assure 100% safety and understandability if the concepts are not coded and translated. So in EPSIS time, it was really mandatory. Now in eHDSI, there are some cases in which also narrative parts are allowed, but there is always the risk of losing understandability. One second induce safety patient risk. So when the country sends something in narrative form, must be aware that it may be source of problems for his own patient while abroad and source of problem for the health professional from abroad. Thank you.
Okay, so good afternoon from me as well. Let's proceed with a short overview of the current standards and terminologies for cross-border that are used in the ePrescription use case. So next slide. So Marcello described very well the process and how this works, and all this document exchange is based on the master value catalog. So there is quite a set of terminologies and standards that are used there, in addition to some messaging and clinical document architecture, or HL7 CDA, in other words. So we'll try to talk about those in a few slides as they come. So next slide. So the document exchange is based on a standard called HL7 CDA, which is it's an XML structured document based on XML technology, which is called the clinical document architecture in the HL7 world. All documents in eHDSI are using this one. So both in the ePrescription indispensation use case and in the patient summary, it is used. CDA are categorized into 3 levels of documents. In our case, we're using level 1 and level 3. So level 1 is mostly an embedded PDF with a CDA header so that it can be queried and searched, while level 3 is a fully structured document where all the content is structured based on specific terminologies. And we reuse the full power of the reference information model provided by HL7 under the CDA specification. Next slide. HL7 CDA is a very stable standard. You will see in a short survey afterwards that it's used in quite a lot of European member states. But technology evolves, and now the new standard that can be used in the same context is called HL7 FHIR. So there is a potential way of converting CDA documents to FHIR, and that will continue and will ensure the continuity of exchange of clinical documents also with new standards and technologies in the future. Next slide. EDQM stands for the European Directive for Quality of Medicines and Healthcare. It's a list of standard terms that were drawn to try to solve some standardization within the European Commission. In our case, it covers the pharmaceutical dose forms and also some combination of terms. For example, to describe where 2 or more items are packaged together, or where a pharmaceutical dose form and a container are described using a single term, things that you can find in the pharmaceutical domain. And as well, there is a set of patient-friendly terms, which are generally shorter than the more detailed ones. And those are sometimes also used in our case. Next slide. ATC is a system that was developed by WHO as a tool for drug utilization research, so that the quality of drug use was improved. It has 5 levels, and we'll see this in the next slides. And ATC is used in eHDSI in both use cases, ePrescription, indispensation, and patient summary. and it's used to code the active substance of the medicine products in the prescription and dispensation. It's also used in the active substances for the same reason in the medical medication summary section of the patient summary. And we are also using ATC in the causative agent in the allergies and other adverse reactions section of the patient summary. Next slide. This is just a short overview of how ATC is used with the 5 levels. And within eHDSI, we use ATC 5. So we try to code the active chemical substance, which is the 5th level of ATC. Next slide. LOINC is another very well-used classification, which is used mostly in the domain of observation. So it's a way of coding, ordering reports, either laboratory or in the medical imaging domain. And it can give a very detailed result of the observation, especially in the laboratory domain. LOINC also has a way of coding different, flagging different parts of the workflows as well. So it's also used in the master value catalog in some parts. So next slide, I think there is an example of LOINC. This is used in the patient summary case. I won't go into the details of how LOINC is used. This is just an example of how a LOINC can be reused in an HL7 version 2 messaging system. So not in the patient summary case. Next slide. SNOMED-CT is a clinical terminology. So it's the most comprehensive multilingual clinical healthcare terminology in the world. It has a lot of countries that have been, let's say, called as SNOMED-CT countries. They are using it in many, many ways. It's a resource with comprehensive scientifically validated clinical content. It enables the consistent representation of clinical content in electronic healthcare records. It is mapped to a lot of other international standards, and it's used in more than 80 countries around the world. So it's quite a widely adopted. And there are several terms that are also used in the patient summary. They are coded in the master value catalog using SNOMED-CT terms. Next slide. Without want to go into more details, the basic idea within SNOMED-CT is that every concept represents a unique clinical meaning, which is referenced using a unique numeric and machine-readable SNOMED-CT identifier. And usually this identifier provides an unambiguous unique reference to each concept. And there are a lot of hundreds of thousands of those concepts in SNOMED-CT. And it's done in an, it's interpreted by a human. It has some human meaning. Next slide. Another very famous classification is the International Classification of Disease. WHO, the version 10 is used in the eHDSI. WHO has moved to and starts disseminating ICD-11, but in our case, we are using ICD-10. It's a coded classification. It's here to facilitate the systematic recording analysis and the components of mortality, morbidity, and also to provide a classification of the diagnosis. And this is the main use that we have in eHDSI. So next slide. This ICD-10 is structured into 3 volumes. One contains the main classifications. The second provides guidance to the users how to use it. And the third is an alphabetical index of this classification. Next slide. Trying to close this short overview of the standards, there was a short survey that was done during the member states, on which 14 of them responded, and on how those different codec systems are used. So we can see here that there's a very wide use of WHO ATC. Most than 10 countries are using it. SNOMED-CT is used for ePrescription only in Spain. and a lot of countries, they use their own national custom systems. So that's the status. Next slide. Concerning this part, this is a way of seeing the variety of standards that are used across the member states. So you see different instances for the active substances, for example. So ATC is used in many countries. Other countries, they use their own national coding systems. UNICOM is used in several countries for the strength. In some cases, we are using, in Spain, they're using SNOMED City for that. Well, just a way of seeing the complexity of the exercise of creating cross-border healthcare and the importance of the master value catalog in the architecture of the eHDSI information exchange model. So next slide. Yeah, concerning the messaging systems, HL7 is a standard that is widely adopted. So 5 countries are using HL7 messaging, 11 are using CDA, and 3 have moved to FHIR. And most of the countries, they are using more than one version of HL7. And that's quite logical because you are using different types of messaging standards or document exchange standards based on the use cases you want to, what you want to achieve as information exchange. So that's quite custom to have this type of multi-use of HL7 standards. And in some other countries, there are either custom SOAP messengers or SOAP APIs, or even ENV 16607 is used, or even pure XML files have been created. There are some examples of use of standards for information sharing for the ePrescription e-dispensation. So Finland is using HL7 version 3. Ireland has based its national infrastructure based on XDS and creating CDA documents there. Italy is based again on the XDS family of standards for exchanging patient summaries. And the Netherlands and Poland, they have their own views, and Portugal and Sweden as well, while Spain is also based on IHE integration profiles. Next slide. I think with that, I will pass the floor to Diogo Martins for the next part of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alexander. Thank you so much, Marcello, and to the audience to stay with us. So at this point in time, we give you an overview about what it is the current situation in terms of the implementation and some bases of the eHealth digital service infrastructure. So the ways we exchange of health data. We already have this debriefing about the standards that you use. So what is the message that I want, let's say, to pass you jointly with Alex and with Marcello in the next upcoming slides? It is really what are the changes that we need to do in order to have the current cross-border prescriptions to be compliant with ISO IDMP. So this work that we are going to present, it is not final. It is something that we are still assessing, and we're working on that in the UNICOM as a work package 5, 6, and 7. Next slide. So some basic concepts, some basic concepts that I think it is important. So of course you cannot read the image on your right. So it is just to showcase that we have a workflow, a flow of information since we start this journey with the ePrescription on a country A, with all the steps and all the actors that are going to interact with this ePrescription until it got e-dispensed on a foreign country. And it is very important for us to understand the common use case that we want to address. And of course, there are some attributes that we need to take in consideration. Of course, it is important to understand if it is a generic prescription, if it is a brand name prescription, a cluster prescription with or without substitution. So this is always an important model that we need to take in account. we found that the attributes that needed in practice, it's not only, let's say, to address the identification or the identifiers of the medicinal products, it is as well other attributes, like, for example, the coded substance, the strength, the structure strength, the quantities, and of course, the dose of the formats. Some of this information, it is already in the ePrescription and the dispensation artifacts, but it's not commonly adopted or in a jointly matter or a common way by the different member states, as we have showcased in the previous slides. It is very important that we have an analysis on what are the needs and what are the areas that we can apply these changes back to back with the fact that ePrescriptions are already in operation at the cross-border level. It is very important for us to keep up this specific topic. If we select specific attributes and their coding are 100% compatible with SPOR, this will be one important uptake to really to progress. Next slide. So this is just to show to you what are our functional extensions. I'm not going to go through in depth about this specific topic. So there are three main axes that are very important to uptake. It is the functional need. Why do we are going what are the type of data that we want? What are the requirements and what are the values that we need to exchange or to come and define in order to have this master product exchange between the different member states in a common level. It is important for us to achieve a data set requirement. So what are the attributes that they need to change or when they need, let's say, to be transcoded, not only as a cross-border level, but as well as a national one. So it is how can we capture the data elements required to enrich the models on the eHDSI, but as well on the national interoperability or in the national artifacts. So it is very important for us with this in mind that we try to collate or we try to understand how this will capture the essence of the IDMP reference data model. In terms of the master data exchange, it is important for us to start defining the interoperability architecture. What are the standards? What are the formats? What are the requirements? What will be the way that we are going to publish this information, or even what will be the methods that we are going to pull or push, or we are going to work on this specific dimension. Next slide, please. In terms of what we do have done at the European level, so we know at this point in time that EMA, it's planned to deliver a product management services and a substantial referential services to support the regulatory activities. So it is very important to be compliant with it. On top of that, these two systems or services, they will manage 2 out of 4 domains in terms of substance, products, organizations. And this will have a referentials to the SPOR master data. So it is very important with this in mind. How can we support the implementation of IDMP and how we do it in practice on the cross-border eHealth services based on the fact that they are already on operation. So it requires an analysis of the attributes that can be changed back to back with the fact that some countries already use proprietary standards, or how can we achieve that? Next slide. So the list of attributes. So let's start with that. So we start with the UNICOM pilot product list. So what are the product lists that we should identify to start making this mapping, to start making this assessment? So a task force was initiated at the UNICOM level to evaluate the different list of medicinal products and what are the attributes relevant to the implementation of IDMP. Are the most prescribed medicines, are the easiest ones, or another attributes that we would identify. For this data model, where package 2 and 9 are evaluating the minimum data set and how and what are the changes will be needed to the eHealth services in terms of ePrescription, ePrescription, eDispensation operation summary, and how can we prioritize the attributes needed for these specific cases. And this will be the core activity that I'm going to give to you in the next upcoming slides. Next slide. So in this specific topic, I'm going to come back to this information later on. So the most important thing it is for you to capture this is a full value of the list of attributes that are needed for the cross-border context. As we have mentioned previously, ATC, it is something that's already available, but there are some other attributes that are not yet met the requirements. For example, the package MP identification. So in terms of PHP ID, for example, the substance or the units presentation. These are some elements that are still important to update. So with this in mind, next slide, I'm going to start drilling down a little bit on what are the things that needs to change. So I'll make just here a stop to see if any of the panelists would like, let's say, to complement on what I have said, or would like, let's say, to give any additional to Marcello and to Alex, or can we move further?
Not from my side. Thank you.
So moving ahead.
If I may, sorry, my video is disabled. Just a second. Here we go. So you mentioned the structures for the IDMP and SPOR, which is of course for the registration and authorization of medicinal products. We have to be aware that having codes for all this is not enough. We also need structures for the data for the purpose of ePrescription, for reusing those data. So the structures to register a medicinal product may be a bit different from the structure that is used in an ePrescription, and that's where the standards, like it was mentioned before, like CDA or FHIR come into play, because they define the data structures that put the coded entries from SPOR and IDMP in the correct context that is suitable for a prescription. Just to add another dimension to what you explained very nicely, Diogo. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christoph, for that mention. I don't know if any other colleagues from the panelists would like, let's say, to add, because it is always important to see this perspective in different angles. I'm seeing that there is some questions that are raising. I will deal with that, or to the rest of the colleagues to help me with it. But when I finish this chapter 4, I will try to answer to some of your questions that we are putting out. So about this chapter, the availability of IDMP compliant with identifiers and attributes. This is where we are going to drill down on our perspective as a cross-border eHealth digital services, what needs to be changed. So the key message that I want to pass to you, it is about, let's say, two things. We need to achieve common agreement between the member states, between the national competent authorities on the side of the eHealth and on the side of the national drug agencies. And it is important for us to understand what can be done with the resources and with the legacy systems and with the legacy coding systems that we use, don't disrupt the business. With that in mind, we determine the identifiers and attributes that are needed for the interoperability. So this is something that it is already in the way with the current exchange of ePrescription in dispensations. It's important to collate that with the work that national competent authorities or national drug agencies will continue using their attributes and codes, but they should be mapped the common EU attributes and codes. So it is, how can we achieve this level of match? So for this, the national competent authorities can agree, or are going to agree, with with a common use of interfaces defined by EMA to provide and get this common product data. So this is one concept. Not all the attributes in this case are relevant to us, but of course only the ones that are relevant for the cross-border prescription, e-dispensation, or to the patient summary services. So open questions to all. This mapping relies upon good management of value sets, which ADQM codes shall we use, what are the values, how will these values be distributed? So this is still an open question to the people that are more experienced to it. And a core message it is the engagement of the national competent authorities is really essential. Next slide. Remember the previous diagram that I showed to you? Here we try to come up and to understand in the current e-prescription and e-dispensation services, There are a lot of things that are mapped, but in national code systems or in some other standards like we have showed to you, but there are still some attributes that are still missing or not available. And these are the ones that we see a strong need to have the correct substitution of the e-prescription when we are abroad. And as I mentioned, the unit of presentation, the substance itself with the strength, with the reference of the strength, and with the package identifier, it is a must for us to achieve. What Marcello will give you in the next part of the presentation, it is how we are going to drill down in a joint venture between Alex and myself. Marcello, to you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes,
Thank you. So, no. I was on mute. Please, and also I was typing answers. So, please, let's continue here. Okay. So, I will not go in detail in this slide. This only describes the way in which change proposals are handled in a formal way within the eHDSI, meaning that a community, a member state may raise the proposal for an enhancement or a change, and a process is established to describe this change, the reason for the business reason for that, and the changes to be included, and there is a process for its approval. And what we are doing now is creating change proposal to as an input to the different communities in order to come to a agreed condition and agreed version for their inclusion in the next specification. So again, this is the concept of the change proposal. I would say that maybe it's better not to devote time here. You have this, you have the standard, the specification of the eHDSI, so maybe better to go more in detail on what will be described in practice. So please go on. Can you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. Okay, coming more precisely on what we need to suggest as changes. First of all, we have business requirement in the eHDSI specification. This business requirement refers from a high level to a more detailed level, which are the requirement, functional requirement, business requirement of the different services. So the first change proposal, it is under preparation, mostly finalized to be transferred to our friends in the eHDSI communities, is the one on business requirement that suggests on what could be added in this business requirement in order to consider the adoption of the attributes from IDMP in order to be able to describe this medicinal product, and also in relation to that, the modification to the master value set catalog, meaning the terminology catalog used in the cross-border services. In perspective, we have also to modify the medicinal product section phase description in the patient summary and ePrescription. So the first of all are the business requirement. The second one are the functional requirement, meaning the functional specification for patient summary, ePrescription, and identification. In this case, the data set to be used will be identified according to that criteria of minimum data set agreed with the national competent authorities to be shared. If we go a step down, we can reconnect with what Christoph Gessner said before. So meaning the implementation guide are the computable description on how the clinical document will be constructed. So giving not just the data set, but also the information related to the cardinality, the code system associated, optionality, etc. So this last level of the implementation guides will include what Christoph mentioned before, having a structured description and a coded description, both for patient summary and ePrescription too. And all this will be given to the EP cluster, patient summary cluster, and the semantic task force in order to work together and build together the needed change proposal. If you go to the next slide. Okay, so the basic idea, as I depicted in the first slide, is to take advantage of the IDMP attributes to provide a coded information on. So the idea now, the idea at EPSIS time was we can use code system based on HTC, based on UNICOM, based on UNICOM, in order to describe medication. But the drawback we encounter until now is that member states were not ready to provide those coded information. So now that the national competent authority are going toward adoption of SPAR and IDMP, we will be able to get this coded information as was described in the model before as additional information in the prescription generated in the country in order to be transcoded into a version in the country A, into a version into the country B. And then at that point, to try to display all the attributes to the pharmacist in order to identify the product to be dispensed and build the e-dispensation accordingly, providing not just an identifier used in the country of treatment, but all the structured and coded information about the really dispensed medication to be returned to the country of affiliation, to be stored into the system, to be recorded for any kind of future treatment. So if you go to the next slide, please. Okay, so this is a more detailed flow. The flow starts with the identification of the patient, get the list of prescription to be dispensed, identify the prescription to be dispensed and identify the medicinal product to be dispensed, send the e-dispensation back to the country of affiliation, and finally provide the medicinal product to the patient. So this is a process. We are already quite late, so maybe it's better to go on to the next slide.
So do you want me to update?
Please,
now?
Of course.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
So I will try to rush a little bit this part because this is more, let's say, the drill down. And in this slide, what we are going to go through from the business value, what we have tried to come up with is what are the changes that we need to apply in each step. So of course there are some things that we are still have in mind in terms of the data set is limited to the active ingredient or the medicinal product package is misleading name, or there is this limited concept. So there is a lot of topics that we need to address. Next slide. What I'm going to cover to you, it is in each of the steps that Marcel showed to you, what are the parts or the sections that we need, let's say, to address. So there is two things that we want to ensure when we receive the list of available prescriptions from a country A. It is to make e-prescriptions available to the healthcare professional, to the pharmacist, for example, and to ensure high quality of the information in this exchange between countries. Next slide. So what we do need to do, it is in these four levels, it is important, it's in four contents, it is important to apply some change in terms of the medicinal product code, in terms of the ingredients, packets, all those forms. For the medicinal product codes, it is very important to enable the provision of ISO IDMP identifiers. How can we enable the provision of the type of the code in terms of the MPID or the PHPID? So it is very important to have multiple attributes with identification of the level and the granularity. and of course to update the description itself and to have a better specifying of these kind of codes when we are using and for what purposes. Next slide. In terms of the ingredients, what we do see it is advantage. It is to add supporting information where it is necessary in terms of the ingredients itself, other than specify the active ingredient. An example, it is, for example, the lactose. It is important to have this information described in the description of the role of the ingredient itself, or even whatever the active ingredient is salt or a moiety, how can we add this type of information to this specific content as an ingredient. When we talk about package, next slide. What we do see that is important to update, it is of course the package size. So add additional information regarding the package size multiplier to include the description of the number of smaller inner package. So it's basically what it is the composition of the package. Of course, one example is 10 plus 0.35 ml. This could be a possible way to do it, but there is some other opportunities or layers to describe. And of course, the package products description. So adding a test field for sufficient detail of the description of that specific medicinal product or package. In terms of the dose form, for the next slide, what we are aiming it is to align this description with IDMP1. We think that this is almost a match and something that is supporting. And of course, to consider the support of the different levels of granularities and of course, the types of those, or let's say even the formats that we want to have that. In terms of the transcoding of these attributes with another ones, it is very important that new translations and transcoders might be required due to the fact that we are having here some heterogenic in terms of having this transcoding. For the next slide, what we are going to aim it is another step. So we are identifying and the selection of the medicine to dispense. Now that we got the list of the prescription, now the step where we are, it is how can we identify the selection of the medicine to dispense? And here it is very important to handle a dispensation of the medicine or the proper substitution. Alexander will give you some information about, let's say, smart substitution. What we are going to change, next slide, or what we are thinking to change. It is, in terms of handling dispensation medicine and substitution, it is very important to understand the business requirements and to flag what are the substitutions or how can we perform the substitution and what it is the processes. How can we have this functionality of smart substitution or smart selection of substitutions to be performed? In terms of in the eHDSI content, it is something that we are aiming for, but it is very important that we have these 4 attributes if you want to make that happen. It is to have the dispensed medicine data, the dispensed medicine ID, the medicinal product code, and of course the number of dispensed package. This is something that we are have in mind that we need to apply some changes. Next slide. So coming up to the last step of the value, to be send a dispense to the dispensed medicine information to country A. So it is a callback function. It is an acknowledgement. How can we ensure high quality information in this exchange between countries? So I already, at this point in time, I already receive a list of prescriptions. I already perform a dispensation with substitution or without. And now what I'm going to refer it is a callback saying that this medicinal product, this medicine has been dispensed. Next slide. So what we aim here, it is really the use of IDMP. This is where the magic could occur. And it is each data field of a minimum data set is translated in a common terminology or nomenclature, as we have said. The match between the national coding system with this common terminology or common nomenclature, it is something that it is very important for this specific activity to ensure the safety and the quality of this e-dispensation. And of course, to achieve a subgroup of a minimum data set, as for example, active ingredient, strength, pharmaceutical, and dose form, and as a unique coding in a common language. So this is how can we achieve a common language for this specific subgroup of minimum data set. So this is the type of information that wants to discover in the next deliverables of UNICOM. Next slide. So this is basically to tell you where we are in terms of the data set, in terms of when we think on a medicinal product. This is the data elements that we have stated. In yellow, you can mark, let's say, the type of things that we think they needs to be changed or need, let's say, to add some other value, like, for example, number of package, duration of the treatment, the frequency of the intakes, the number of units per intake, the active ingredient, the medicinal product package, the pharmaceutical dose, or the strength, some of the topics that I have mentioned to you in the tree. Next slide. And here you can find, let's say, concrete topics that we think that are important really to uptake. It is really about clarifying concepts. How can we agree, for example, in terms of the terminologies for the route of administration, or even to clarify concepts in terms of the active ingredients, medicinal product package, and so on. So to have these global identifiers for the different product levels, it's not enough. It is a very important step, but it is very important that we address other attributes that are important for this smart substitution. So I'll finish with my last slide just to showcase to you what we are aiming in terms of the next step for the work package 5. So we are at this momentum when we say deliverable 5.3, the guidelines for cross-border semantic interoperability. And so we have understood what are the needs from the business and from technical side. So we are at this point in time having some specifications of to provide that assets. In 2022, our main ambition will be how can we define technical specifications, guidelines for the national competence authorities or to the national eHealth competence centers, and to have a common minimum data set for implementation of these services. So this is our core objective as a work package 5. Nothing but not the least, last but not the least, we are going to have these change proposal submissions to the eHDSI to start aligning with the governance model at the European level, what needs to be changed in this specific dimension. Marcello, I don't know, in this case, I think it is Alex that's going to showcase to us what we do have in the work package 6. I don't know if any other panelists would like to add on what I've said. Marcello, we are not hearing you.
I thought Christoph was taking the floor. Anyway, I can make a very quick comment here. And in my first slide, I remained at the semantic specification level with the implementation guide. Now you'll see here that we will have also a cooperation on the technical implementation of the component and on the, yes, exactly. And now really is the time for Alexander to speak about work package 6.
Thank you. So let's move to the next slide. So this is the same, let's say, structure as presented for work package 5, which will be the driver for our work package. We are, let's say, the software factory that will enhance the existing eHDSI open source tools, and will add some new components as well, to be able to create and implement the specifications defined in work package 5 as presented by Diogo just before, and also support the pilots that Marcello will just present afterwards in the next slides. So as a matter of work, we have split this in several tasks. One task is really dedicated to defining the correct API to be able to get IDMP attributes into the eHDSI world. The second component, which is maybe the most innovative of what we're trying to do in UNICOM, is to try to propose a smart substitution component to some extent to try to enhance the percentage of dispensation for prescribed prescriptions in the cross-border domain. Obviously, we will have to revise some existing eHDSI tools so that this can be achieved and introduced as change proposals in the different waves of eHDSI. The semantic component, again, is going to be enhanced to be able to add the attributes proposed as described in the previous slides. And finally, there are two tasks that are more on the technical part. One is for creating and enhancing the test platform that eHealth is using, so that this can be tested and we can follow, again, all the test strategy of eHealth correctly. And finally, this is a technical support to solve any help desk to solve any open questions related during the pilot operation. Next slide. Just a few more points on smart substitution, which is the challenge that we want to try to address in the upcoming months. Substitutions is defined as the exchange of a medicinal product by another medicinal product that differs from the original prescribed with regards to one or several attributes. It could be the name, the quantity, the dosage, the dosage form, or the strength. We hope that with all these additions from the ISO IDMP attributes that were described before, we are able to increase the likelihood that we can have and perform a prescription, a dispensation of a prescription from a country of treatment. And our vision is to be able to provide more attribute to the pharmacist in country B. The country B is the country of treatment, to properly identify the right pharmaceutical drug to the patient, to match a substitute equivalent of the dosage needed for a patient in case the packaging is different from country A to country B, which is happening in some cases, to reduce the risk of adverse reactions, all this that Diogo mentioned about allergies and the lactose example and all these things. And obviously to see if we can provide more guidance to the patient and information concerning the dispensed medication. Next slide, and back to you, Marcello.
Thank you. I was answering to the chat, and I hope I finished. So now work package 7. Work package 7 is really the piloting part, and it is extremely ambitious. So I don't know how familiar you are with the eHDSI procedure. We have 3 environments in the eHDSI. One is the development environment, internal to each member state. Then we have a pre-production environment where member states are testing the different implementation, and a real environment in which the real patient can be victims of prescription dispensation of patient summary. So the basic idea here is to follow all the steps. So starting from the implemented extension, not just in the specification, but also in the component, we will define this testing and piloting procedure, starting with the testing in pre-production using, of course, virtual patient, virtual data, and pilot product list to start understanding how it works and to show that we are not decreasing the quality of the current eHDSI, ePrescription and patient summary, but we are enhancing the quality, performing this conformance testing using the testing tool that Alexander described first, and also end-to-end functional testing, always in pre-production. So when we will obtain the approval, the agreement, and the green light to go to operation, and this implies also that the data injected are not derived from unauthorized sources, but certified sources on the IDMP attributes are used by every single member state to add this information in the ePrescription. And that means that the source of information should be provided directly by the national competent authority in strict cooperation with the Ministry of Health of every single member state. We will be allowed to go in operation, meaning that every time an Italian citizen will be in another country, Estonia, for example, it can take advantage of this enhanced ePrescription, because there is a mechanism by which the Italian ePrescription is enriched with the IDMP attributes provided by IFA, meaning the National Competent Authority for Medication in Italy, through the Ministry of Health and Ministry of finance national contact point. So it is then presented in the pharmacy as a clinically legal and medically valid document with this extension. And it will be a challenge because we are planning to test several thousand of ePrescription and 1,000 patient summaries. So 10,000 ePrescription and 1,000 patient summary in real operation. But this is of course related to the possibility of restarting after COVID, because for the time being in 2020 and beginning of 2021, we have very few cross-border activities, as we all know. So this is the hope, and this is our planning in this project, not as a pilot of the project, but as a real service within the eHDSI, thanks to the cooperation that we described until now. Can you go to the next slide, please? And as a final remark, click, please. Thank you. Okay, so we learned that in this famous work package 5, we will build the change proposal to improve the specification for wave 6, meaning testing in 2022 and going live in 2023. So completing specification by the end of 2021, testing in 2022, and then going live in 2023. In work package 6, that will be the implementation part, and in work package 7, what I already described as enrichment of the ePrescription, eDispensation, patient summaries document in order to achieve what is in the last bullet that I mentioned you before. So the goal is really to be able to exchange up to 10,000 ePrescription and 1,000 patient summary enhanced using this IDMP attributes. So very challenging. Next slide, and I think we're almost over. Yes, this is really to highlight our pillars. NCA cooperation engagement. We are really creating in UNICOM this strong link between NCA and eHealth communities and authorities, and also this strong link between UNICOM and the eHDSI communities in order to really be ready for this a very ambitious extension of the current services. And here I will stop, leaving the floor to the panelists, and any other would like to ask a question. I'm happy to answer if possible, if feasible, it's able.
Well, thank you, Diogo, Marcello, Alexander. And if anyone from the panelists wants to reflect on what's just been said, please go ahead. There's quite an active discussion also going on in the Q&A. So you might even want to point to some of those questions and bring them to the wider audience as well. Anyone?
Yeah, I would just poke a bit the discussion to look around the articulation that was explained in the first slides between the regulators and the information that the regulators have and the information that flows on the clinical path. So this is just an open topic, and I would like to see if there's interest in going deeper on that also, because it relates to some discussions. Do we have any ideas, or does the community have any ideas on how to facilitate, or what would be the requirements for this articulation between the information that belongs in the regulatory space and the information that belongs in the clinical space? So, for example, all this discussion between around the use of EDQM and MEDRA, that makes sense, but perhaps we don't have one code set or one value set that's going to be the one that everyone uses, because we have the pivot that Marcello explained in the beginning. So I would like to see if you want to take it from there about this, the differences that, if you look at this from the regulator side and if you look at this from the clinical side, you do have preferences, or you do have value sets that are more adequate. And how do we want to address that? Not only technically, but also in the most important, which is the coordination between all the parties, so that everyone feels that this is a working solution.
Anyone?
Oh, Marta, please.
Oh, no, Matilda, you first.
Never.
No, please, please.
No. I was asking a question to you, but please, Marta, comment.
I would like to comment on the question about Medra. I maybe also, Christoph, wanted to comment on this. Well, in the eHDSI, the selection of the code systems included in the master values catalog are, for example, the set of criteria include being in use in the member states that are participating in the eHDSI, that are internationally agreed, etc. For problems, for the current problems and the past problems, the condition of that the patient in the patient summary are included. We are using today ICD-10, and this is because in member states they are recording that information using ICD-10. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Marta. And Christoph, you were already announced of what you do.
Yes, but I raised my hand. I raised my hand because José brought up a very interesting topic, of course, which is not, as I said before, is not only solvable with terminologies, but also needs the appropriate structures. And I just can tell you that there is currently a vivid discussion going on within the HL7 standardization organizations, who provides the base standards for everything we're talking about here in terms of exchanging the data. So there is a discussion exactly on that. Of course, the goal is that you do not want to have the data live in various places and then become inconsistent. So there must be some way of let's say, importing data from the regulatory space and reusing them in a somewhat different context in the for prescriptions and for patient treatment. And that's, as I said, it's an ongoing discussion how to solve this technically and in a semantically useful way. So I can encourage you to engage in those discussions, that is in the different HL7 working groups. José, you're aware of this discussion, and we can continue this there, maybe, this discussion. Thanks.
Thank you, Christoph. And it is a topic, especially the regulatory versus clinical world, has been covered also previously by the community of expertise on the representation of clinical information, where especially those mappings, some of the mappings that were mentioned, both from EDQM to SNOMED CT or to the master value catalog, and also the other way around from the clinical world to MEDRA or EDQM for adverse event reporting purposes. That has been quite well, well, at least detailed. I mean, it's not solved, and we're still working with EDQM and MEDRA and SNOMED and others to make sure from a work package 1 point of view, so the IDMP related standards and terminologies, that it's fit for purpose, both in the regulatory sphere as in the clinical sphere, and of course back through pharmacovigilance into the regulatory sphere as well. So, but it is a challenge. And that was also quite well illustrated, I think, by the uptake of the different standards and terminologies as presented by Alexander. So so that's where we are. There's Peter Bachmann who wants to enter into the discussion. Please, Peter, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I was intrigued how easily you are speaking about substitution in OSI system. So it happens on several slides, several locations. To my understanding, substitution is mostly triggered by political decisions. I'm not aware, with the exceptions, that we substitute a different name of one medicinal product to other. We have a really sound scientific basis for substitution. Can you comment on this? Because I haven't heard everybody. It's about substitution. Thank you.
Who wants to answer? I think one of the speakers, Diogo, you want to...
We have 3 hands up, so let's start.
One can start and the another can complement. So of course I can do. When we start substitution, mainly what we want to cover, and at least this is my perspective, as I am answering, the rest of the panelists can complement. It is about when I go to a foreign country, how can I get, let's say, a substitution from a prescription that I get in my origin country. So basically, a product that is not available in the country B, and that I need, let's say, to make a substitution on that. So it's not available. It's something that's not authorized or being sold in the country B. How can I have, let's say, an e-dispensation on that country with a product that it is similar or in a way have the same active ingredient? Christoph, Marcel, do you would like to complement?
If I can answer to this one, I think it's not the problem you're speaking about between countries. We have the same problem within countries.
Let me try to clarify a little bit here, at least if I can. I think in cross-border prescription, we're talking of a slightly different concept of substitution. I mean, it's basically always a substitution because typically the same medicine that is available within your legislation and jurisdiction is not exactly available under the same product identifier in another country. So you're always kind of substituting. Yes. So the process that is important for cross-border e-prescription is to support the pharmacist and the physician, the prescriber, in translating what they have in their country as a packaged product, usually with the PZN number in Germany for national product number, to translate this into a generic prescription that can be understood in a different country, and then to support the pharmacist on the other side to reconstruct what packaged product he can give over the counter or in the pharmacy he can give to the patient that fulfills the same pharmaceutical requirements, so to say. It can well have the same ingredients, the same strength, but it's just a different national authorization, also authorized package. So this is probably the 80% case or 90% case of cross-border prescriptions. So, and I think it's this kind of substitution that we first have to address, and then think about what Peter Bachmann mentioned, that there are some regulations that you can substitute and reimburse a different product than was prescribed, etc. So just my 2 cents on this discussion.
Can we listen to Marta before we comment?
Please.
No, Marcelo, please go.
No, you first.
I was just going to mention our use case. It has a kind of definition what is substitution in eHDSI. Always, as you know perfectly, that always country B rules apply. But it's considered that when transferring the representation of medicinal product, active ingredient, strength, pharmaceutical dose form, substitution of brand name is allowed unless mark as not permitted, and always respecting the rules of the country dispensing. Thank you, Marcelo. Do you know that?
No. In fact, you mostly exhausted. So first of all, we have to distinguish on what is a selection and what Christoph nicely described is going to a generic prescription and then selecting another country, something that is totally equivalent to the other one. Substitution could be slightly substitution of unit of presentation, those form, route of administration, no, already not. So these are things, but there is a specific flag that Marta mentioned in the ePrescription created by a physician in country A saying prescription not allowed. That means that that specific medicinal product produced by that market authorization holder cannot be substituted because of some excipient included that are for sure not to which for sure the patient is not allergic, or to this specific medication has shown a particular pharmacokinetic, etc. So it's good for him, generally speaking. So changing that packaged medicinal product could be a problem, but we have in our prescription also the market authorization holder, and we are observing it in our domain like vaccine, in which the same product, the medicinal product produced by the same pharmaceutical company, changed the name abroad. So is it a substitution to take the medicinal called Marcello from Pfizer in Italy, or Benedetto made by Pfizer in Germany? Again, this is a change of name, and we have really to study and to be careful. That's why in the ePrescription we have this market authorization holder also as an element to really help. But I agree with you, Peter, is a very serious problem. In the eHealth network ePrescription guideline, there is a long section in the release related to substitution. The problem of substitution is a problem. Substitution within a country is a political, economical, managed point. In cross-border, hopefully we don't have this sort of limitation. We have only the patient in the center, and the best that we can give as a service to the patient, not to create safety problem for him.
Thank you.
For her himself, for his wallet, it doesn't matter.
Thank you, Marcello. There's two more hands up, and we're almost running out of time. Carl, did you want to add something to what you already answered in or put in the Q&A? Carl Strootman? If not, then there's Francois Xavier Liri also.
Okay, now you can hear me?
Yes, Carl.
Okay, good. I just wanted to add that there are several issues here which are not mentioned. And I put this into the Q&A. Maybe in general terms, in open medicine, we looked in detail into substitution issues. And it is so complex that in almost any member states, we did not find agreement even across experts what the substitution rules really are. They are complex, and in some countries, how do you say, pharmacists have a certain leeway. What they can do, they can, for instance, decide themselves if there are 20 in the prescription, whether they hand out a package with 24 or not. In other countries, this is strictly forbidden.
Carl, in the interest of time.
Yeah, okay, I stop here. But okay. One basic issue on substitution is the e-prescription in cross-border is a private prescription. The patient has to pay. So many of the rules applying for reimbursement purposes on substitution just do not apply. And okay. People all the time mix this up.
Thank you very much. And then, even though we're just a little bit past time, I want to give the floor to Francois as a final question.
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Yeah, thank you. No, just to explain also as a pharmacist regulator, the nervousness that we express about substitution is that there is the additional issue is that substitution means very often substitution of a brand name by a generic product. So, which is not Pfizer versus Pfizer, but say, well, another use case. Which is highly regulated. Of course, there is reimbursement behind, but it's also there is an element of competition behind that. So that's why it's even more tricky. So, I mean, I see the point and I see the effort behind to make that possible. But that's why people are so cautious about the wording substitution.
Thank you for clarifying that. And with that, we come to the close of this session on cross-border e-prescription and patient summaries. They were handled as well. Thanks again very much to Diogo, Alexander, and Marcello, and to our panelists, Marta, Christoph, Jose, and Anderson. Thanks very much for being here. And of course, thanks all our attendees. We ranked over 70 attendees at some point. So thank you for joining us. Please meet us again at the end of August. We'll skip July for a summer break, but in August we'll be talking about the topic of ATC and INN a bit further with the help of the WHO responsible for both terminologies. So please stay tuned for any advertisements of the next community of expertise, and wishing you all a great summer and see you in August. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. See you. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
And
Bye-bye.
thank you for the interesting question. I'm happy to answer. Good. So running to have a meeting now.
Esther, can you stop recording?
Yeah, I already did.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
And stop streaming on YouTube as well.
That's Lisa.